Hello, FISMA Friday friends. It's great to be back with you as we slide into the weekend and into a brand new month. And today we are going to learn about the not so obvious places that auditors might check while doing inspections at food retail facilities and how the FDA food code impacts not just food retailers, but also F&B manufacturers and producers and distributors. But first, since a lot of you are new who are joining us, welcome. It's great to have you here. This is our monthly series that's put on by Safety Chain and the Acheson Group, and it's here to provide you with regular updates, insights, and guidance that surround the Food Safety Modernization Act. And the best part is that you get a chance to interact with our expert speakers to get advice directly from the source. But before we dive in, I got to give some housekeeping items. So first, we've muted all attendee mics, but we will be leaving room at the end of today's session for some Q&A. So as mentioned earlier, send in your comments and questions at any time during the presentation, and we will do our absolute best to get through them all. But if we happen to run out of time today and we didn't get your question answered, we will absolutely follow up with you later today or soon thereafter. But this presentation is being recorded, and you will absolutely get the link today for the replay and also for the slides. All right, let me welcome back to FISMA Friday Dr. Karla Acosta, who has a great deal of experience in food retail safety and training, and we're very, very lucky that she's here to guide us on this topic. So Karla, thanks for coming back. I know some folks probably didn't see your previous FISMA Friday presentation, so would you mind spending just a few moments to introduce yourself and tag before we dive into today's topic?
Of course, yeah, thanks for having me back. So a little bit about me. I am, as Jim mentioned, Dr. Karla Acosta. I live in Texas. I've been with the Acheson Group since last October. But prior to that, I was a health inspector for about 5 years. My jurisdiction was in Houston. And then after that, I pursued my PhD to learn more about food safety training specific to retail food safety. But most importantly, I was interested in how individuals learn, especially novice learners. So employees who maybe didn't get a chance to learn how to read or write. I did my PhD dissertation on that. And then I was also an adjunct faculty for the University of Houston and the University of South Florida. And now I'm here with TAG, and I'm very happy to be back and excited for today's webinar.
Absolutely. All right, but first I think we have some FISMA updates, right?
Yes, we do. All right. Awesome. Okay. So we do have some FISMA updates. So the FDA released its report on the occurrence of foodborne illness risk factors in fast food and full service restaurants. So according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, more than half of foodborne illness outbreaks that occur each year are associated with food from restaurants, which I'll actually be talking about a little bit more in detail today. And then this report is part of the FDA's 10-year, so it was from 2013 up until 2022. It was part of their 10-year study on trends in the occurrence of foodborne illness risk factors and food safety behaviors and practices in food service facilities. And then on June 26th, the FDA posted new frequently asked questions and additional tools to provide industry with more information about the FDA Food Safety Modernization Act, or FSMA, food traceability rule. So these FAQs address questions to help clarify how the rule applies to specific situations and are largely based on questions received during the FDA's regular interactions with industry and on questions sent via their technical assistance network, which is their central source of information for questions related to FSMA rules, any programs, and implementation strategies. So I recommend taking a look at the additional tools that were developed. And then on June 14th, the FDA announced that they will be extending the comment period or the draft guidance for industry, which is called Questions and Answers about Dietary Guidance Statements in Food Labeling. which appeared in the Federal Register on March 27th of this year, 2023. And the new deadline for comments is now September 25th of 2023. And then finally, on June 1st, so at the beginning of this month, the FDA announced the availability of a final guidance for industry called Action Level for Inorganic Arsenic in Apple Juice. So this final guidance identifies for industry the action level of 10 parts per billion, or ppb, for inorganic arsenic in apple juice. And this was issued in draft by the agency in 2013. So the guidance supports the FDA's goal to reduce exposure to environmental contaminants from foods that are commonly consumed by babies and young children, so immunocompromised. As lower arsenic levels are more protective of public health, we expect to revisit this action level as part of the FDA's Closer to Zero action plan, which you can find more information for on the FDA website. All right, so those are FSMA updates. Now let's go ahead and get started. So why is food safety important? Well, the CDC states that each year, 48 million people get sick from a foodborne illness, 128,000 are hospitalized, and unfortunately, there are 3,000 fatalities from foodborne illnesses each year. Now, in terms of outbreaks, when it comes to foodborne illness outbreaks, approximately 60% come from restaurants and 14% come from caterers or banquet facilities, which, if you do the math correctly, means, again, going back to those numbers, that means that nearly 75% of all foodborne illness outbreaks come from the hospitality industry. Now, if that doesn't scare you, I don't know what will. I expect that most of you should be looking at the other side of the screen like this, but there's several factors that contribute to this high percentage of outbreaks. At the end of the day, it truly comes to lack of training, lack of a good and established food safety culture, and lack of an established training overall. But one aspect that definitely affects this is the high turnover in the food industry. So let's talk about that and why. All right, so employee turnover is a challenge that has grown drastically amid the COVID-19 pandemic. So in January of 2021, the Bureau of Labor Statistics announced that the turnover rate for the hospitality industry reached 130.7% in 2020, compared to the 78.9% in 2019. Now, the Center for Hospitality Research, or CHR, at Cornell estimates that the cost of employee turnover averages around $5,864 per person for a typical frontline employee. Now, with the estimate, the CHR estimated that most of those costs come from recruiting, selection, orientation and training, and even productivity loss. So the cost of losing one employee alone makes it worth to take measures to try to keep your people around longer. It's not an easy task to reduce your turnover rate, but it definitely can be done. And that would be a whole other webinar within itself, but this highlights the importance of training and building training materials so that you can help address that lack of food safety knowledge from new or your novice employees, and also have an established food safety training program that is not affected by the high turnover rate of the industry. Now, the importance of regular self-audits. So this is the best way to know what's going on in your operation, especially if you have new employees who may not know what to do. So it's good practice to have these audits so that you as a supervisor can address issues hands-on as you see them happening. But it's also good to practice these audits so that your employees can ease some of their inspection or audit nervousness. When I was a health inspector, you could tell the culture of the establishment just by how the employees reacted to my arrival. A law would run and almost avoid me as a health inspector. And there were some establishments where you could tell they had nothing to fear because they had nothing to hide. They all felt comfortable and confident about the food safety practices in their establishment. And then, of course, the importance of communication. If you want to establish that comfortable and confident culture of food safety in your establishment, it truly starts with communication. This could also be another webinar within itself. Having an open line of communication with your employees is so important to not only retaining those employees because they feel included in part of the decision-making process, but also to help with your corrective actions. So establishing that line of communication will help employees feel comfortable telling you when something is not right so that you can address food safety issues as they arise. All right. So now we know the importance of food safety, the importance of retaining employees and establishing a food safety program built around communication, self-audits, and trainings. Now let's cover inspection frequency. So what is that and what does it mean for you? So inspection frequency is simply put how often a jurisdiction has you on the schedule for the next audit or inspection. So this varies per jurisdiction and agency, but they will all have some form of risk assessment analysis to identify the inspection frequency of your establishment, which is based on the following factors. So product made or served. If you make food that is considered high risk, you will be inspected more often than establishments that have low risk food items and procedures. So a sushi establishment is going to get inspected much more frequently than a gas station that just serves prepackaged food items. Past inspection history. So this one is a big factor and really important to take note of as a manager or supervisor. So if you have had a poor inspection history with a lot of violations, or if you've been known to not be in compliance in the past, you are definitely on their radar. My biggest tip to you is even if you're a new manager or under new management, I recommend that you take a look at those records and see where you have been deficient in the past, because those are oftentimes the first things that the next inspector will want to take a look at. All right, population served. So if the food that you make is intended for high risk populations or those that are immunocompromised, you will definitely get inspected more frequently. So childcare centers, nursery homes, hospitals, all of these establishments will be at the top of the list because of their high risk population served. All right, and then operation and foot traffic. So this one is not so commonly used as an assessment for inspection frequency, just because it's generally pretty hard to quantify this. But when I developed the risk assessment analysis for my previous jurisdiction, this is something that we use as another measure of risk combined with the first three bullet points. So essentially, if you are opening or you're an open establishment for 24/7 and you serve thousands of people per hour, you are considered higher risk and will be inspected more frequently than, let's say, a fine dining restaurant that's only open Friday through Sunday and just for evenings. So with that, other jurisdictions and agencies will quantify that operation or foot traffic if they make above a certain amount in revenue. And this is more common with produce or growers, and that's just their way of assessing how much business or foot traffic they have. And the last three are pretty self-explanatory, but inspection frequency will also depend on the bandwidth of the department. So some have limited inspectors and they'll be a little behind. And of course, if you have a customer complaint or a report, or even a suspected foodborne illness, you will get added to the very top of the list. And depending on the situation, it may turn into an investigation, which means that they'll be at your door for quite a bit. But no worries, this webinar will teach you how to prevent these incidents from happening. And all you have to do is take notes, pay attention, and apply these concepts. All right, now, step one to passing an inspection or audit is to know what is being asked. It's like taking a test without knowing what the content of the test is, right? Your likelihood of passing is much lower if you have no idea what's going to be asked of you or what's on it. So do your homework, see what regulations apply to you. Now with this one, let's take a look at the Food Establishment Inspection Report, which is Form 3A, located in Annex 719, if you want to pull it up and follow along. Now, even though this is from the latest version of the 2022 FDA Food Code, a lot of these concepts are based on research. So if you're in the manufacturing industry, almost all of these principles also apply to you. So at the very top of the report, you will see foodborne illness risk factors and public health interventions. It might be a little blurry to see in this picture, but that's what that says. And the way they define risk factors is that risk factors are important practices or procedures identified as the most prevalent contributing factors of foodborne illness or injury. So public health interventions are control measures to prevent foodborne illness or injury. So this is what's defined here, and this is how the report is divided. So you'll see this section is, I'm hoping you can see my cursor. If not, just it's the very first part of that report and what it looks like. But it's important that you understand the report and what some of the acronyms mean. So in or out, in means that it is in compliance. Out means that it is not in compliance. And these are all important to note, especially as you get marked off during your inspections. Now, NO means not observed, and NA means not applicable. So these two will not be counted against you. COS, okay, this means corrected on site. If you're taking notes, I strongly recommend that you write this down. This is something that you should, if you've had anything that is out of compliance or not in compliance, there should almost always be a COS next to it, because that means that you corrected it on site as the problem rose up during your inspection. So you definitely want a bunch of COSs for all of your establishments. And then R is a repeat violation, and you don't want that R column to be filled, because that means that will put you at the top of the radar, and these are the very first items that inspectors will look for, just because it's something that you're frequently out of compliance in. All right, now step number 2. Once you understand your jurisdiction and what applies to you, then you can dive into the self-audit. So let's dive into these self-audits. So again, going back on your self-auditing practices, after this webinar, I expect that all of you will implement this into your operation. And to do that, I recommend that you take out a piece of paper or take notes on your computer and write down the terms, the items that apply to you and how often you need to audit or revise these items, so that at the end you're left with a handy list of key themes to monitor in your operation. And then you can just turn it into a formalized self-audit checklist at the end. All right, so starting with good hygienic practices and employee health. Key things to add to your checklist are hand washing technique. So are employees washing their hands correctly and at the appropriate times? Are hand washing stations properly stocked? So do they have soap, running hot and cold water, single-use paper towels, trash bin designated for those same paper towels? And who is overseeing this or verifying this. So you need to make sure that all hand washing sinks are readily available and not blocked by anything or used for anything other than hand washing. Make sure that you can designate an employee that you trust to verify this, or you can verify it yourself, whichever works best for you and your operation. So glove usage. With single-use gloves, how are they being used and how often are they changed? Health inspectors and auditors will spend a good amount of time checking to see what your hand washing and glove practices are like in your operation. So just make sure you want to maybe do this in your self audits and just for 5 minutes, just observe what your employees are doing, how they're handling products. After they touch raw items, are they then proceeding to wash their hands and then applying gloves? You would be shocked to see what you'll be shocked to find out what you see if you just take the time to self audit yourself. And then hair restraints. So are they being used properly by all food handlers? And are hair nets and beard guards available to your employees? And is everyone handling food or food contact surfaces? So those people handling those services, are they wearing one? Now with jewelry, there should be no jewelry other than a plain band wedding ring. But I also wanted to note on medical bracelets that if you or any of your employees have a medical bracelet, a good alternative is to have them tie up their medical bracelet to a chain around their neck. And then on that, they can put that necklace inside of their shirt so that in case, let's say it, falls off, it'll be inside of their shirt and won't risk falling into food. And that way, if something happens related to their emergency, they have that emergency medical bracelet on them. All right. And employee health. So symptoms and reporting. Do you, as the person in charge, know all the symptoms that need to be reported? So do your employees know what symptoms those are? And do they know what jaundice means even? I recommend having a visible poster or sign that lists out these symptoms. And a great place to put it is in the employee break room area. Just make sure that it's accessible and available in all of these spoken languages in your facility. And another aspect of employee symptoms, your health inspector or auditor may ask you questions to test your knowledge. So if you do not know the reportable symptoms and exclusion versus restriction practices, that is a violation that will be counted against you. So with the logic being that if the manager or person in charge doesn't know, how do you expect the employees to know themselves? So overall, with personal hygiene practices, inspectors will evaluate the personal hygiene of your food handlers, including their hand washing techniques, use of gloves, hair restraints, and overall cleanliness. So compliance with hygiene standards is definitely essential to prevent the transmission of pathogens. All right, so nobody would want to eat the food from that video, right? Even if it's from Slim Shady or Eminem himself. So when it comes to personal hygiene, don't underestimate your role in a personal hygiene program. You have many responsibilities to help make the program work, and some of these are highlighted in this slide. Now, believe it or not, your auditor will want to not only check your personal hygiene program, they'll want to see how and if the program is being properly executed. So as a manager, you need to focus on the following. With one, creating personal hygiene policies. So if your facility or operation does not have a written out personal hygiene policy, how are employees going to know what's expected of them? A common mistake that I would see is operators assume that personal hygiene is common sense. When it comes to personal hygiene, even if you think it's common sense, write it out and be specific. So don't just say employees must wash their hands and use gloves, right? That is too vague and often just open for interpretation. So instead, write it out. Employees must wash their hands for 20 seconds, write out when they need to wash their hands and how often, as well as proper glove usage procedures. I have seen many employees wash their gloves instead of their hands, which again, common sense is not so common. So better safe than sorry, write it out. Now, training food handlers on personal hygiene policies and retraining them regularly. Once you've written out your policies, train employees on it and then retrain at least once a month. Most importantly, you need to model correct behavior at all times. Employees will look up to their supervisor and the person in charge. So you, as that person, need to model the behavior that you want to see in your employees when it comes to food safety. And with supervising food safety practices and revising personal hygiene. So when it comes to revising personal hygiene policies, when any laws or science change, make sure that you stay notified of any changes. These webinars are a very great resource for knowing when policies have changed. And we recommend that you also subscribe to email notifications from your regulatory agency. Now, let's talk briefly about the time and temperature requirements. Okay, so key things to add to your checklist for time and temperature control of safety. With proper cooking time and temperatures, so are foods reaching the minimum internal cooking temperatures? How is that being checked and who is verifying these procedures? With reheating procedures for hot holding and cooling time and temperature, if your operation reheats food, pay attention to what the maximum temperature for that equipment is. So is it properly being reheated to at least 165 degrees Fahrenheit? Sometimes what I would commonly see is facilities using hot holding units as a measure of reheating. Hot holding units, oftentimes they only reach 135, maybe 145. So it's not going to reheat your food to at least 165 degrees Fahrenheit. So be sure to pay attention to that. And are employees trained in proper reheating? So if you're cooling down food, do you know the right temperatures and time requirements to get that food below 41 degrees Fahrenheit? Again, you'd be shocked at how many operations I've seen where they thought that they were reheating and cooling food down properly, but really they were just creating an environment that's ideal for bacterial growth. So there's a lot of numbers associated with time and temperature practices. This is something that you definitely want to take a look into for your self audits of your employees. Are they properly doing it? And then with hot holding temperatures, pay attention to the equipment you use to hot hold. Again, it should be able to keep all of your food above 135 degrees Fahrenheit. With cold holding temperatures, inspectors will check if there's proper airflow allowed in your cold holding units. So you don't want to stock up your coolers with so much food that the unit doesn't allow for proper airflow and doesn't keep foods below 41 degrees Fahrenheit. So we'll talk about temperature recordings in a few slides. And then date marking and disposition, as well as time as a public health control. With that, you want to make sure you have your procedures and records. So making sure you have labels available and that they're properly being filled out with the discard date. And if you're using time as a control instead of temperature, you need to have all of your documents and records in place and readily available. Keep in mind that your health inspector or auditor may ask you for records from 3 weeks ago. So be cognizant of that, but we'll talk about that later. All right, so this slide is to serve as a refresher And it's also something that I recommend turning into a poster or visual sign for your employees to prevent time and temperature abuse. So as you may know already, most foodborne illnesses happen because time and temperature control for safety food, or TCS, food has been time and temperature abused. So remember that TCS food has been time and temperature abused anytime it remains between 41 and 135 degrees Fahrenheit. So this is called the temperature danger zone because pathogens grow in this range. But most pathogens grow much faster between the 70 degree Fahrenheit and 125 degree Fahrenheit range. Now, food is being temperature abused whenever it is handled in any of the following ways. Maybe it's cooked to the wrong internal temperature, it's maybe held at the wrong temperature, or cooled or reheated incorrectly. So this is something, again, that I recommend taking note of in your own facility and testing your employees to see if they're doing these correctly or if retraining is needed. The longer that food stays in the temperature danger zone, the more time pathogens have to grow. So keep this in mind. To keep food safe, you must reduce the time that it spends in this temperature range. And if food is held in this range for 4 more hours, you need to throw it out. So definitely write this down as one of those things that you need to self-audit and keep track of during your operations, daily operations. It's something that will definitely come up during your inspection as well. Okay, now with preventing time and temperature abuse, inspectors will look at your temperature control. So inspectors closely monitor food temperatures at various stages, including storage, cooking, and holding. So make sure that the correct kinds of thermometers are available and that there are enough of them being supplied to your employees. Regularly record temperatures and the times that they're taken, and we'll talk about that in the next slide. And then take corrective actions if time and temperature standards are not met. So if something was not meeting the right temperature, what corrective action was done and who did it? So let's talk about temperature logs. Okay, so with temperature logs, like the title says, can be your friend or your enemy. You decide, you pick. So make sure that you are filling out the entire form in your temperature logs. Sometimes they would, in the past, sometimes, they would have temperature logs and they would only fill out the temperatures, not the date, corrective action, not who took that initial temperature. So make sure that you're filling out the entire form. And the best way of ensuring that temperature logs are being filled out is to make it easy and intuitive for your employees. So I recommend consolidating all of your temperature logs into one binder, booklet, or even a clipboard, and then have the logs be in order of the flow of your restaurant. So instead of going back and forth in your operation or trying to find missing logs, they're all just in one place. And you take the temperatures starting in one location and have the logs in order as you make your way through the operation. Okay, so one thing that operations almost always miss. So why shouldn't you use the temperature gauges in these holding units? I would love to see your answers in the chat. Take a guess. Why shouldn't you use the temperature gauges in these holding units? While we wait for those answers to come in, I'll just go ahead and tell you. Maybe your answers, you'll type them out faster than me answering, but these are often not calibrated and they need a technician to properly calibrate. So you should have temperature measuring devices that you put inside of your units towards the entrance and at the top of the unit to get the most accurate reading. So I recommend having a supply of these removable temperature measuring devices on hand because they always go missing. They either break, and that way, anytime that something happens, like it breaks or it goes missing, you'll always have an extra as soon as it needs its replacement. Now let's talk about contamination. So when it comes to protection from contamination, actually, oh no, sorry, I clicked away too fast. Okay, there you go. When it comes to protection from contamination, food handling and storage, specifically for that, inspectors will pay close attention to how foods are being received, stored, prepared, and served. So they will check for proper temperature control to prevent bacterial growth, cross-contamination risks, and appropriate storage conditions to minimize the risk of spoilage or contamination. Now, with sanitation and cleanliness, inspectors assess the cleanliness of food preparation areas, the equipment, the utensils, and the facilities. They want to look for proper cleaning and sanitizing procedures, as well as what measures you have in place and overall maintenance of the premise to prevent contamination and ensure a safe environment. So, receiving practices: who is receiving food in your operation? Where are the logs? And are they doing it properly? No bare hand contact with ready to eat food or a pre-approved alternative procedure properly allowed. There really should not be any bare hand contact in your operation with ready to eat foods. And then food separated and protected. So raw foods need to be separated from your prepared or ready to eat foods. And then the last 4 bullet points, I'll go into more detail in the next few slides, but they are: food contact surfaces. Are they being properly cleaned and sanitized? How often are food contact surfaces being cleaned and sanitized? And who is doing it? And are they properly following procedures? Are testing strips available? And are they readily available? Can my employees accurately test the sanitizer strength? So if you ask your employees to check the strength of a sanitizer, will they be able to properly do it upon being asked? All right, so with preventing cross-contamination, each type of food should have separate equipment. So for example, use one set of cutting boards, utensils, and containers for raw poultry in your operation, and then use another set for raw meat. You can use a third set for produce. And with that, we recommend colored cutting boards and utensil handles because it can help keep that equipment separate. And the color tells food handlers which equipment to use with each food item. Now, with cleaning and sanitizing, clean and sanitize all work surfaces, equipment, and utensils after each task. So when you cut up raw chicken, for example, you can't get by with just rinsing the equipment. Pathogens such as non-typhoidal salmonella can contaminate food through cross-contamination. So to prevent this, you need to wash, rinse, and sanitize. And are your employees doing well? But most importantly, you need to remember to train your employees on the difference between cleaning and sanitizing. With sanitizing, so food contact surfaces must be sanitized after they have been cleaned and rinsed. And this can be done by using heat or chemicals. So one way to sanitize items is to soak them in hot water. And for this method to work, the water needs to be at least 171 degrees Fahrenheit, and the items must be soaked for at least 30 seconds. Now, another way to sanitize items is to run them through a high temperature dishwasher. With chemical sanitizers, these are regulated by state and federal environmental protection agencies, or AEPAs. So for those requirements, you can check with your local regulatory authority, but the most common ones that are used are chlorine, iodine, or quats. And in some cases, you can use a detergent sanitizer blend to sanitize, but oftentimes operations that have like a 2-compartment sink, those are the ones that often use these. But more importantly, does your operation have a cleaning and sanitizing log sheet? And is that readily available? Is it being filled out daily? And how often are you cleaning and sanitizing? This should be done at least every 4 hours. But apart from checking your sanitizer, that it's being changed and used properly, you need to check your sanitizer effectiveness. So concentration is measured in parts per million, ppm. And to check the concentration of a sanitizer solution, you need to use a test kit. So make sure that it is made for the sanitizer being used. These kits are usually available from the same chemical manufacturer or supplier. And you also want to keep in mind that hard water, food bits, and leftover detergent can reduce your solution's effectiveness. So you want to change the solution anytime it looks dirty or its concentration is too low, and check the concentration often. So with your concentration, make sure you keep your sanitizer logs filled out and readily available, keeping in mind that you should sanitize at least every 4 hours once again. The best way I recommend you train your employees, instead of telling them, oh, for quats, it needs to be 200 parts per million, or I want to say this may be a chlorine-based testing kit, instead of telling them, oh, it needs to be somewhere, 23 parts per million. I recommend you just guide them to the middle. Read the instructions on the back of these testing kits. Usually the right strength is in the middle. So let them know, hey, if it comes out the same color as when you put the strip into the solution, so for this one, it's already white. And if it comes out white, that means just pure water. If it comes out to be this purple color, then it's pure sanitizer or pure chlorine. So make sure you let them know you want it to be somewhere in that middle color range. It might be easier for some of your employees to remember that as opposed to telling them that quantifiable number. Oh, I keep flicking through super fast. Sorry about that. Okay. With food labeling and allergen control, so inspectors verify that food labels are accurate and comply with labeling regulations. They also check for proper identification and control of allergenic ingredients to prevent those allergic reactions in susceptible individuals. So make sure that you check your facility traffic flow. Allergenic materials must not be brought into production rooms during non-allergenic production. And personnel working with allergenic materials need to wash thoroughly, change uniform, and clean their shoes before working in non-allergenic materials. With labeling and storage. So labeling food is important for many reasons. Illnesses have occurred when unlabeled chemicals were mistaken for food such as flour, sugar, or baking powder. And customers have also suffered allergic reactions when food was unknowingly prepped with a food allergen that was not labeled. So when you're labeling food for use on site, all items not in their original containers need to be labeled. And food labels should include the common name of the food or a statement that clearly and accurately identifies it. Make sure that you train your employees to also fill out the initials of the individual that filled out that label. Again, the date it was made, and then the use by or discard. And finally, with compliance with regulations, health inspectors verify that the establishment complies with local, state, and federal regulations governing food safety. So this includes checking licenses, permits, and documentation that's related to food handling, storage, and preparation. When it comes to record keeping, inspectors may review various records such as temperature logs, cleaning schedules, your employee training records, and supplier documentation. So these records help ensure that proper food safety practices are consistently followed. With HACCP compliance, health inspectors may assess the implementation and the adherence to the hazard analysis and critical control points principles. And with water and sewage systems, so these inspectors examine the establishments' water supply and sewage disposal systems to ensure that they meet health and safety standards. So this helps prevent the contamination of food and the spread of waterborne diseases. And you should also, in your checklist, you should also have your pest control records, your employee schedules, and any sick calls that were made, along with your employee training records. Okay, so after that checklist, you should have a pretty decent checklist by now of what applies to your operation, how often you should do it, what you need to look out for. And if you follow all of those key recommendations, you should feel comfortable and confident in your food safety practices. Now, I'll briefly cover how to survive a health inspection and some other pieces of advice to keep in mind. So, 2 simple tips that will save you. 1, understand how food laws work. What applies to you? What is it that you need to be in compliance for? 2, health inspectors and regulators are not your enemy. This one's very important to understand. Be sure to take notes when you are being inspected or audited, so that way you don't just rely on your memory. I know you want to believe we all have good memories, but just accept it. None of us do. So just write down what they say, what to do, and where that violation or deficiency was located in, so that you can go back and correct it. But most importantly, fix as many things as you can. You want to see that COS on your report corrected on site. So that tells not only, the health inspector, your supervisor, or any customer that, has public access to these records, it shows that you corrected items on site. As they showed up, you took action to fix them. With operational inspections, so my biggest piece of advice is to be respectful to your health inspector. Keeping inspection frequency that we discussed earlier in mind, some regulatory authorities will show up unannounced and usually during your busiest times of operation, because it's when your food safety culture and practices really come to light. Keep that in mind when it comes to inspections. Don't get angry if they show up during the most inconvenience of times. That's usually when health inspectors show up, is during the worst of times. Okay. So with your inspections, again, the inspector completes an inspection that must be signed by the person in charge. This signature is an acknowledgement of receipt, and the manager then keeps it on file. But most importantly, when it comes to emails, you need to respond to their emails. So anytime they communicate with you, make sure to respond as soon as you are able to, as soon as possible. Accompany your inspector. Take advantage of their experience. So help them help you. Ask questions. Inspectors, believe it or not, are there to educate and help you. And walk with them, because it also means that you're available to answer questions they might have and change items to correct it on. Now, it's also important to note that there may be instances that are non-negotiable where you have no control and they have to shut down your operation. So after careful review, an inspector might determine that an operation poses an imminent health hazard to the public. And so in some states, they may ask for a voluntary closure or issue an immediate suspension of the permit to operate. Now, if an operation receives a suspension, it must cease operations right away. However, the owner can request a hearing if they believe that the suspension was unjustified, but the suspension order may be posted at a public entrance to the operation. So this is not required if the operation closes voluntarily, but regulations may vary among different authorities. So that's something to keep in mind. And to reinstate a permit to operate, the operation must eliminate the hazards causing the suspension, and then it needs to pass a reinspection and receive written approval to open. So if you come across any of these items, significant lack of refrigeration, backup of sewage into the operation, any emergency, maybe it's a fire, a flood, uh, significant pest infestation, long interruption of electrical or water service, or there's a clear evidence that your operation is implicated with a foodborne illness outbreak, you will definitely be closed. A quick note that I want to make with the emergencies such as fire or flood or interruption of electrical or water service. So when I was a health inspector in Houston, we got hit a lot with hurricanes. Some jurisdictions, I know like that area, may allow you to temporarily open or stay open with no water service or no electricity, depending on the situation, just from an emergency standpoint, perhaps just serving prepackaged food items, again, depending on the emergency, but that's something to keep in mind. It's always best to just check with your local health department what you are allowed to do. But if you are feeling lost, that's okay. Who are you going to call? Not the Ghostbusters. You're going to call TAG. So if you're feeling lost, there's several services that TAG can do for you. And I always like to market the Acheson Group or TAG that we can help come into your establishment and give you the honest truth and feedback as well as recommendations for any deficiencies. So with the eyes and brain of a health inspector, but the heart of a friend. A lot of us were previous regulators. A lot of us also were managers or directors of the manufacturing facilities or of other restaurant operations. So we have that experience. We've been there, we've been in your place. But more than anything, the heart of a friend, we want to make sure that you feel comfortable and confident during your next audit to be able to pass the inspection. So TAG helps food companies ensure their compliance with FDA, USDA, and any other foreign food safety regulations through document and facility reviews and assessment. We can also help you with recall crisis management. So we can help you with to ensure that you're prepared for a recall or a crisis through interactive simulations. We help you with the development, review of recall plans, and crisis assistance with food defense, supply chain, hygienic design, with sanitary design of equipment and the facility are very critical and important to food safety, but it's an assessment that can be very complex to undertake, and TAG can help you with that. We also help with food safety culture. So whether you're seeking to implement a program or assess one's effectiveness, TAG has the expertise to build and improve the food safety culture of a business. And if you're interested in food safety training, maybe you're like, you know what, I need training myself, train the trainer training, or even if you want us to train your employees, we are very happy to help you. So all you need to do is contact us and we would be happy to provide you with any of the services and guide you along to make sure that you pass. All right, and with that, I'll turn it back over to Jem.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Karla. I love it. The brain of an inspector, but the heart of a friend. I absolutely agree with that. It's beautiful. Thank you so much for this presentation.
Thank you.
And I personally learned a lot. This was kind of new content for me, so I appreciate walking us through, again, making it contextualized for a lot of the folks here on this call. So I know we're kind of running short on time, so I want to make sure we get through some of the bigger questions that have come in. There's a theme here that I picked up on, which is really self-auditing, getting yourself to the point where you are confident that if an auditor or an inspector walks in unannounced, you're ready for them. So you mentioned a lot of different risk factors, such as hygienic practices and time and temperature controls or labeling. Is there one in particular that you have found in your experience, or you're still seeing in your role here at TAG, that is still kind of the common offender?
Ooh, a common offender. The top two that come to mind are personal hygiene related and time and temperature related. So with personal hygiene, it's oftentimes the knowledge of the employees and the people in charge or managers, oftentimes employees, if you ask them, hey, what are the reportable symptoms if you have, what should you be announcing? Oftentimes they lack that knowledge, or oftentimes there's just lack of training or materials for those individuals to, continue learning and know what they need to report to their managers. And then with the time and temperature reviews, there's just so many numbers that need to be memorized. And I don't blame, my heart goes out to food handlers because there's a lot of memorization that takes place. And oftentimes some back of the house employees have not had the opportunity to learn how to read or write. So that becomes an even bigger challenge for them. And remembering, what the minimum internal cooking temperature, that's completely different numbers for each produce or food commodity. And then with reheating, that's one number. With cooling down products, that's another number. And time, you have to get it from 135 to 70, or from 70 below 41. So these are the practices that oftentimes employees and managers too have trouble remembering, but also training their employees in. But like I said, you don't have to do it alone. You can reach out, have someone help you, I can help you, but those are definitely the top two.
Yeah, that makes sense. Again, going back to sort of this whole idea around supervising, making sure that all of these best practices and actually the keeping compliance within the food code. Do you have any suggestions on how to get shift leaders or even just the business owner involved in making sure that everybody's kind of working according to the process and it is doing what it is designed to do?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot that can be done, but more than anything, managers and any person in charge, the best way to really know what's going on in your operation is to be visible and involved in your operation. If you're just constantly in your office, that already doesn't show a good culture or a good view of, well, I never see my manager, or I don't know where they are. If an issue arises, you want to be there, you want to be present, you want to be visible so that if a problem occurs, they have someone to turn to. They also want to see you, like I said, modeling correct behavior. So you want to be present to not only be able to monitor behaviors, but also correct them as they occur and be that trainer, hands-on trainer or person to show them the model the correct behavior that they should be doing. So though being present, top advice, make sure even schedule in your calendar a
Hmm.
few hours to just be on the floor just to monitor that. I would strongly recommend that.
Yep, I agree. Okay, so we have a lot of food manufacturers and producers on this webinar as well, and some questions have come in around, how do you actually gauge the high risk? And I know you had mentioned during the contamination piece around like receiving practices and potentially like identifying as it comes into your facility what could be a high risk product. So can you speak to those food manufacturers and producers and kind of walk them through how the food code actually does impact what they're doing at a high level? I know that's a very deep question.
Yes, very deep question. And it really just depends on the food product itself, the ingredients, and then the manner in which it's made for manufacturing facilities. But for more than anything, as it relates to the food code, if you are serving foods that are considered high risk, and the food code does have or lists out, especially in the annex, the higher risk food items. If you have any of these food commodities, especially the raw products, usually you're considered more on the high risk. Anything that is ready to eat, more than anything, your risk will be just preventing environmental contamination or further contamination, but the other um, the aforementioned ones with any raw food commodities, there's several procedures. If you have receiving procedure, and then how are you does it go from zone 1 to zone 2? How does that work? And is there being transfer of not just allergens, but maybe other potential environmental contaminants? I know my colleague, Mary Hoffman, in the previous webinar mentioned a little bit about that and talked about pathogens and environmental controls. But if you have more procedures that go into that food product, usually that's a pretty good indicator of it being higher risk. But again, it just
Mhm.
depends on your operation, the food, and the way that it's made in your operation to really
Right.
determine high risk. I'd be happy to answer specific questions
Definitely. And
offline, one-on-one.
we will send you some there, Karla. I know we're out of time. I got one question. I have to ask this though. What is your stance on allowing devices such as cell phones or Apple Watches into a food manufacturing or food retail facility? And obviously, there's a lot of reasons for having one, right? For emergencies or what have you. But you had mentioned, just have a wedding band. That's pretty much it.
Ooh, yeah. So jewelry, Apple Watches, any watches in general are not allowed per FDA food code. So those should be left in employee break rooms, employee locker rooms. But when it comes to your cell phone, it really varies per operation. It's really up to you. I would recommend having a no phone policy, but also being reasonable and providing some break times for your employees to be able to, if they're expecting a
Check in.
call or if they have something, going to the employee break room and being able to answer that. But yeah, it creates an opportunity for them to grab their phone, text, and then maybe they don't wash their hands afterwards. So I would recommend a no phone policy. But be reasonable also with letting them take
No
breaks.
phone policy except if you need to call tag to get some questions answered. So I think we're gonna wrap it up with that, folks. I really appreciate everybody to join to us today and all the great questions that we have. And of course, Karla, this was a great presentation. You had hinted at some topics that we might want to follow up with, so I might take you up on that. But thanks again, everybody. If
Awesome.
you have more questions about this topic, again, you can send them to us here at Safety Chain, or we will send Karla's information along with the recording and the slides of today's presentation. We do appreciate it. We hope you have a great weekend, everybody, and we hope to see you on next month's FISMA Friday. Take care.